Hi, all. Welcome back to another episode of the Wholeness Wisdom Podcast. My name is Erin, and I help people work from a sense of separation and lack to experience the wholeness that is inherent within ourselves, but does not seem apparent in the society that we're living in. I want to talk today about the sense of lack and how this has been systemically and intentionally woven into the society that we live in order to uphold these systems of oppression, and how the remedy for this really begins within our own curiosity. Curiosity is the remedy. And I'll get into that in a little bit. Before we get into that, I would ask you to please like, comment, or subscribe to this channel if you're interested in these topics of reuniting with the wholeness that we are and deconstructing systems of oppression. The algorithm really doesn't care whether you agree or disagree. It is all numbers based, and it helps this message or these topics get into the collective, which I believe is very helpful to stem curiosity from within to the whole. So thank you so much, and let's get into it. I want to begin with the origins of this. And I've heard some debate, and I had my own confusion around which came first, racism and the white supremacy that we see in the United States of America, especially with the rise of the alt-right. There's a lot of racism that's been going on for a very long time here in the United States. And my confusion was this happening longer than patriarchal systems of oppression? So the belief that women are inherently weaker than men and that a male-dominated society just makes sense, which was happening longer. So then I took the amazing Therese Lee's course, which I highly recommend, which is online, called Witches, Whores, and Rebels. And she really helped me understand the timeline. She breaks it down very succinctly. So I'm very briefly going to touch on this. The patriarchal system of oppression, which looks like a failing, crumbling capitalism right now in the United States, began and is held up by the sense of lack. And the sense of lack in a social environment, not just a sense of lack on the inside, but a sense of lack on the outside, looks like resources that are running out, not enough workers, not enough babies being born. Whenever there's a sense of lack in the community, there are compensations that come in to try to bring it back to balance, right? So the first time that we really saw lack on a global scale was the arrival of what we call today the bubonic plague or the Black Death. So the major bubonic plague outbreaks began around 1350. It was spreading into all of these different parts of Europe. And for the first time, these more integrated global networks of trade were being affected by huge die-offs of people from the plague. And when this happened, what was a society that had been able to support itself through growing crops and trade, and yes, there was slavery then. It wasn't slavery of a predominant race of people, it was general slavery. When all of these people were dying, there was a shortage of people. People were dying, not enough people, not enough labor, not enough food. So all of these systems of integrated living were crumbling because of a lack, because of the Black Death. And once this happened, there needed to be a compensation. And the compensation for the bubonic plague, because there was a lack of labor primarily, was the subjugation of women. This is what Therese helped me understand. So the subjugation of women, because women had largely been equal members of society. They were equal members of society in the way that they operated in commerce, running their own businesses, doing lots of labor, but also doing lots of the figuring out of systems and leading. When there was a lack of labor, patriarchy began to rise, the idea that women belong in the home or women belong to the birthing labor. Because we have the ability to give birth, they were really funneled into that role only because of the lack of people. So women began being forced into this submissive position within society, not allowed to choose what they want to do. That happened around late 1400s. So the bubonic plague was mid 13. late 14 were the witch trials in Europe. And the witch trials were centered around this idea that women don't belong in the outer sphere, they belong in the inner sphere of the home. And that was dictated by men. Right around this time, the transatlantic slave trade began to happen. This was the subjugation of Black people out of Africa being stolen from their land, stolen from their home, and put into enslavement. And after this, right around this time, also came colonialism. So I want to mention that each of these had a sense of lack built into it. The sense of lack that was built into the bubonic plague outlook, what was happening during the bubonic plague, again, was a lack of labor. And then with colonialism, these upper class white men, largely, and their wives, who were under Puritanism, they needed to be dominated and kept in the home. They were under very strict rules. When these settlers arrived in the Americas, there was a lack of food. There was a lack of labor because really these were upper class men who were able to go over. So when that happened, there was a lack of capital, there was a lack of food, there was a lack of available resources. So the compensation that came with that experience was to enslave people using the transatlantic slave trade. That was the compensation. And then with expansionism, once the colonial settlers had beaten people into and murdered people into submission, they realized that they needed more land for more white settlers. So that was a lack of land. So the compensation for the lack of land was threats of violence and genocide of Native people. That was a compensation. Throughout this, there was a rise of individualism. This was on the personal level. So far we've been talking about the social, community, economic level. Now on the individual level, there was a rise of individualism. I can come into these territories, I can stake my claim. And in that individualism mentality, the sense of lack that is woven into that outlook is a lack of power. In that mindset, I don't have enough power, therefore I need to compensate. And that came through the subjugation of entire groups of people, including Black and brown people, people under enslavement who had been everything that was theirs, including their bodily autonomy, stolen from them, subjugation of women, subjugation of Native people. So there was the compensation for power was subjugation and theft. Then another outlook at the time that was on the individual level, individualism. The other outlook that was coming into full bloom in this country at the time was religiosity. Religiosity, of course, had been happening since the split of church and state and the rise of Roman Catholicism. When religiosity, from that outlook, there is a lack woven into that as well. And what is the lack woven into religiosity? It's a lack of the divine. It is the idea that there is no spirit here, it is somewhere out there. And therefore, there is a lack of the divine here. The compensation for that sense of lack, in order to try to find some harmony from that belief point, was the projection of evil onto other people. So if there's a sense of not enough God here, not enough spirit or divinity here, then the evil must be there to try to balance those scales. So there was the projection of evil onto entire groups of people, including just calling people Black people and calling white people in that dualistic kind of speech and language. It was tying in the idea of evil because Black people aren't the color of Black, and evil is not even connected with the color Black, but the white Christian religiosity had taken those concepts of color and Black and white and attached evil and purity to each of them so they could project evil onto entire groups of people. Then there was also the rise of scientism or materialism. This is when church and state split, and the lack that is woven into scientism, and we could even say atheism or materialism. Again, this is not science itself. This is a belief system. This is an outlook. So from the outlook of scientism, the lack that is woven into that is a lack of meaning. And the compensation for that is to project meaning onto numbers and information. And just a quick side note, I'm going to add that it doesn't really work because Charles Darwin devoted his whole life to the study of information, forsaking the divine. And he has lots of quotes of how depressed and meaningless his life was, like this one. So if there is information and meaning out there in numbers and collecting information, there is a compensation of the lack of meaning here with the idea that I could get that. I could take that information in, therefore it would balance my lack of meaning. So if you see all of these outlooks, these social and individual outlooks have a sense of lack woven into them. And for every sense of lack, there is a compensation for something outside that could be taken in, could be stolen, could be demanded, could be grasped, could be measured, and that would fill my cup, fill my empty cup. All of these systems are built on this sense of lack. And all of these outlooks, all these senses of lack are resting on one sense of lack. They're all just outgrowths of one sense of lack. And I would say that is the lack of clarity about who and what we really are. When we look at these different traditions that are not white Christian rooted, they're rooted in more of an interdependence or an interconnectedness ethic. These are tribes of South America, tribes of North America, Inuit tribes, really tribal people, Eastern traditions, Buddhist, Zen, Hindu. These traditions are not male-centered, they're not white-centered, they're not a singular God-centered, they are oneness-centered. And the difference in these traditions, we could say white Western mind has a white single dominated sense of lack ethic. There's something outside. And these other tribal or primitive or traditional ethics, mental ways of thinking about what is, they are wholeness oriented. It's different. Wholeness is I am part of the whole. I am intrinsically connected to the whole. And the other is the whole is outside. The emptiness is here. And it's out there where I can fill that emptiness. So this is the difference. And I would suggest that the sense of lack is completely manufactured. It is a mental system which is it's based on accounting for what is not here and accounting for what is out there that could bring that in, that could bring that fullness in. It's beginning from a sense of force. There needs to be some participation of force on my side of this in order to bring back in. And I would say that there is a grief that comes with that outlook, the outlook of a sense of lack. And there's a grief that is hidden underneath the surface. It's this low level sense of unfulfillment, lack of satisfaction. And we could say that that's a motivator. That is a motivator in our society. Lack of satisfaction would be the birth of innovation, perhaps. But I would suggest that in this manufactured sense of lack, in this society, in this capitalist, white supremacist, patriarchy system, the sense of pressure and lack is very, very important because it drives the system. It drives the funnel from the individualism mindset, who is individual, who has a lack of power, to drive their way up to the powerful position. It's a system of individuals. And in order for that to work, everybody that is below that driving force for individual power must have a sense of pressure so that they're driving for the same thing as well. Because in their striving and in their driving, they're generating the labor, they're generating the resources, they're maintaining all those other levels of sense of lack in order for this power. Really, that's the point of the pyramid in patriarchy, for the power to be held in a certain position, and the ones who have power to remain with that power and to try to get even more, while everybody underneath is also striving for that power while they're generating the resources. So much energy is being spent in ignoring wholeness, because this is something that is very important for that system to work, is to ignore wholeness and to have that manufactured sense of lack and to have the manufactured pressure. There's something we actually experience in public schools in the United States of America, and I would suggest private schools as well, is where curiosity is beaten out of children because of this pressure that's coming in around time. So when we think about how many years a child is allowed to be in school, we have this from year X to year Z, the child is being educated, and all of this regimented information must fit inside this window. Therefore, there's a pressure of getting it all in within that amount of time. And in order to get this assignment finished by this date, there's no room for curiosity. So it's very systemically built, consciously or unconsciously. I would think it's both, in order to have this product of an educated child come out at the end. And in order for that product to be finished on time with all the information that it needs to keep the system working, there's not a lot of room for curiosity. And curiosity is what lends us the feeling of wholeness, because there's room to pause and to wonder, am I a product, or am I an individual that is not alone, but is woven into a fabric of life? The curiosity is essential. And in these more traditional societies, traditional as in non-Christian white derived societies and ways of thinking, there's already the curiosity and the mystique around our connection to the divine. It's not that the divine is out there, but the divine is all around me in these myths of our culture, in the symbols of our culture, in the songs and in the dances. We dance so that we dance with God. We sing so that we sing the divine. We feel the vibration of the ethereal through our bodies when we dance and we sing. And we all have roots in tribal societies. Before there was developed society, there were tribal societies. Our deepest roots are that of vibration and that of community and of the web. Before there was conceiving of having agriculture, having tools and systems of commerce and trade, before this, there was living as nature. Nature wasn't something that is separate from people. There wasn't people and nature. There was nature, and nature didn't have a name. It was just what we are. And every object wasn't separate from that. It was that too. So in order to change the way that we're thinking from a sense of lack, I would suggest curiosity is the key. That is our cure. It is not a band-aid. It is actually the salve that goes in and heals the wound of patriarchy that we've been covering over, not wanting to look at. And just like when we have a diseased part of our skin, maybe it's in a place that's not quite visible, it's like on the side of the hip, or maybe it's on the back and we need to look at it in the mirror. We can just say, I don't want to look at that today. But when we do find the courage, when we find the courage and the motivation to acknowledge there's something unwell here, and there's not something unwell that's out there, it's on me, it's in me. The disease is not just on the skin, it's in me. And to not feel shame and not feel guilt about that, but be curious, what's going on here? And have the courage to just take a little bit of a look. And once the courage is there, that is where the curiosity can blossom. And the beauty with curiosity is that it's not answers. Curiosity is not answer focused. It is the unknown focused. And that is what children are so good at doing, is to be allowed to be in the unknown and to feel the wonder and enchantment that is in the unknown. Curiosity, as I said, it's been beaten out of us in this society, so it's almost a bad word. It's like, maybe it's not a bad word, but it's like infantilized. It's like, oh, curiosity is for cats. And we have this idiom, at least in English, that says curiosity killed the cat. So it's even has a negative connotation in some ways, that curiosity is dangerous. I think that's not by mistake. I think that's on purpose. And when we bring a living curiosity into our experience, then we can have the courage to not ignore how much energy we've been spending in propping up the system. And we can say, I'm not going to ignore that pressure. I'm not going to ignore the pressure of the time clock at work. I'm not going to ignore the pressure of I need to get dinner on the table at this time. I'm not going to ignore the pressure of rent needs to be paid by this day. I'm not going to ignore that, but I'm going to pause. And so much of the pressure, the manufactured pressure in under this society's systems, is time pressure. That people need to be very quick and they don't have time for curiosity. Remember, this started very early in schooling. I don't have time for curiosity. So if we take back that time to pause, not time to do something more, but time to stop and feel that pressure. When we can feel that pressure, I can say, yes, I feel that pressure. And then also be curious, what is feeling that pressure? As I said before, we're living under a system of oppression. And when we can take back that time that has been given to us as a perceived lack of time, a perceived pressure that there's not enough time, when we take back that time, it is very different than the messages that I've been hearing, which is that the way to change these systems of oppression is to decenter men, which is absolutely important for people who are women who are so indoctrinated into people pleasing that all that they know is to center another person as their sense of meaning and purpose. In a way that it's a start, but I would say it's by no way at all the means to the end of these systems of oppression, because it still stays in this duality of they have too much, I don't have enough, and if I take this away, then I can compensate and reach a level of harmony. I would say what we need to do, what we can be exploring, is the idea of rejecting the sense of lack. And not rejecting it so that we say it's not there or avoiding it, like not looking at that thing that's going on the skin, but to say, okay, there is a perceived sense of lack. There is a feeling of pressure. And to take back that time to say the pressure that there's not enough time for me to be curious, I'm going to set that aside. And I'm going to actually hold space for myself to feel the pressure that's happening in my body, to feel the system of oppression that is like a disease, like a bacteria, like an infection that has to be acknowledged and it has to be attended to. It can't just be rejected. It can't just be decentered. It actually has to be centered in order to see what's going on there and then to wonder, is this really where I'm living from? Am I living from this wound? Or is there something that this wound has been distracting me from by draining my energy, by putting pressure on me, by giving this perceived sense of lack? Is there something that has been ignored in order for this to be so important? And I would say that the way to return and reunite to a sense of wholeness within and around is to let curiosity back into one's life and to disengage from the time pressure mentality, to disengage from the lack mentality, And when disengaging from the lack mentality, to let there be curiosity there. Because when we let something go, there's a process called fluid compensation. When one thing is taken out of the picture, something will come in to replace it. And we need to know that fluid compensation is not a grabbing kind of compensation. It's that something will come in to fill that space. And if we intentionally wish that curiosity come in to fill that space, then we're not compensating with something that we are thinking, we're assuming is going to fill the emptiness, but we're letting that be felt, letting whatever the emptiness is, letting the idea that there is emptiness step to the side, fall away, that there's any lack, that there's any pressure. When we let that kind of flow to the side and let the fluid compensation be with curiosity, we can step outside of that realm of lack and be curious about what's experiencing the pressure, what's experiencing the sense of lack. To feel that sense of lack or sense of pressure, and then to let that step to the side and then wonder, who's noticing this? And I would like to end on this note that when we are experiencing ourselves from a sense of wholeness, from a sense of interconnectedness, from a sense of reunification with everything that is happening in the world around us, every person, when we're living from that place, we can actually wonder, is there really anything that is gender when I close my eyes and I let memory fall away? Any memories and any things I've been told, when I close my eyes and experience no images and just be here, can I find a gender? Can I find a race? Can I find an age without any memory, without any stories? Is there any nation here? Just from what's experiencing. And that is the curiosity, is not to say, I have an answer to that question, but to wonder, to let the wonder be present, and to live from a place of wonder and openness. What comes in is our wholeness. And there is an experience that I would love for you to be curious about, of that wholeness not coming in from anywhere outside and not from anywhere inside either, but for it to be what is, just like before there was a word for nature, before there was a word for people, it is what is. And to know that our participation in acknowledging wholeness and reunification with our own wholeness, that is the remedy to this falling, failing, crumbling system of oppression that we live in the United States. And that we can not de-center anything, but to be curious, what is the whole? So what is not at the center, but everywhere? And let that curiosity fill in the whole, fill in the gaps. And I would say this is a way that we can freely be with other people without assumptions, without a story, without deciding before we come into contact with them that they're bad or they're wrong, but to be more curious. And from what I've learned from listening to Black and brown women who talk about the topic of these systems of oppression and from their experience, is that the best thing that we can do as white people who want to learn how to decenter whiteness is that listening openly and curiosity about somebody else's experience is the remedy for that separation that we've been maintaining unconsciously, subconsciously, and in these covert ways of communication. As white people, listening is the best thing that we can do, and being open to the humanity and the experience of another person is the best thing that we can do. And I would suggest that that is also globally true. The best thing we can do is to be curious. The best thing that we can do is to be open and wonder, not just what is this disease in me, but to wonder what's perceiving that there's something wrong. And can I be more curious about that? Not be curious about what's wrong, but be curious about that, which is perceiving something wrong. So these are dialogues on wholeness. This is what I love to talk about. And I love to talk about the systems and the intersections of these systems of oppression with topics of wholeness and consciousness. And if you're interested in this topic, I would love to hear what you think about what I've been sharing today about the sense of lack. And I would also love for you to subscribe to the channel because that helps me get this message to more people, and more people will see these videos. It will fit into the algorithm. And that is really the only way, that I can let this be heard is through you. So I really appreciate if you help me in those ways. I have some articles that I've been posting on wholeness-wisdom.com. If you're curious about more of this, I would love to see you there. And I hope you have a great day, and I'll see you next time.